The woman who walked into the Advanced Flight Dynamics wing was invisible. She moved with a quiet economy that seemed designed to deflect notice, her graying hair tied back in a severe, functional knot. Her fatigues were worn, washed so many times the fabric was soft and the color had faded to a dusty sage. She was assigned as a technical consultant, a title that, on a base bristling with cocky young pilots and ambitious engineers, meant she was glorified maintenance. The pilots, striding past in their form-fitting G-suits, saw only a janitorial shadow, another relic from a bygone era assigned to polish screens and coil cables. She carried a small, worn toolkit and said nothing, her eyes absorbing the vast, echoing space of the hangar, the smell of ozone and hydraulic fluid, and the gleaming husks of the next-generation simulators. Her name was Alara Vance, but no one bothered to learn it. Colonel Madsen reviewed her transfer papers with undisguised irritation. The file was a ghost, thin and heavily redacted. "Technical consultant," he muttered, tapping a pen on his desk. Alara stood before him, perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. "Consultant on what, exactly? Your file is mostly black ink. Command just said you were being assigned here to observe and assist." He looked up, his gaze dismissive. She was older than he'd expected, lines etched around her eyes that spoke of long hours and little sleep. "Look, Vance, this is the bleeding edge. We're qualifying pilots on the Cerberus interface, the most complex flight system ever designed. Stick to running diagnostics on the secondary systems. Keep the benches clean. Stay out of my pilot's way." "Understood." He didn't wait for a real answer. "Good." Dismissed, Alara gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, sir." Her voice was low and even, a stone skipping once across a still pond before sinking without a trace. For days, she did just that. She observed. From a quiet corner of the control room, she watched the pilots wrestle with the Cerberus simulators. She didn't watch the main holographic displays showing the frantic combat scenarios. She watched the pilots' hands, the minute, panic tremors as they lost control. She watched the flicker of their eyes as the system's feedback loop overwhelmed their senses. The young aviators would emerge, sweating and cursing, blaming the machine. "It's unstable," Lieutenant Kai Jensen, the squadron's hotshot, declared after a particularly brutal session. "The haptic feedback is asynchronous. It fights you," the engineers would nod, poring over data streams that told them nothing. Alara simply watched, her expression unreadable. Once, while she was methodically cleaning a console, Jensen noticed a faded patch on the sleeve of her fatigues, tucked away near the cuff. It was a stylized black raven, its wings swept back, and beneath its beak was a single, stitched tier of silver thread. He'd never seen the insignia before and dismissed it as some forgotten maintenance unit's logo. The pressure began to build. The Cerberus simulators, the multi-billion-dollar centerpiece of the Air Force's future fighter program, were failing. Not just glitching, but actively inducing catastrophic failures. Pilots were being thrown into unrecoverable flat spins in the virtual world, the violent G-force feedback causing extreme vertigo and, in 2 cases, blackouts. The manufacturer's technicians flew in, spoke in acronyms, and left with shrugged shoulders. The program was on the verge of being suspended. Madsen's career was tethered to it. During a critical evaluation, Jensen was locked in a simulated dive, the alarms blaring, the machine refusing to respond to his inputs. Red lights flooded the cockpit. He felt his consciousness tunneling, the artificial gravity crushing him into his seat. He barely managed to hit the emergency override before passing out. Panic rippled through the control room. Alara, standing in her usual spot, remained perfectly calm, her gaze fixed on the system's core status monitor, a stream of code no one else was watching. That night, long after the hangar had emptied, a lone duty officer saw Alara enter the main simulator bay. He assumed she was doing a final cleaning sweep. He watched on a security feed as she walked directly to Jensen's simulator, the one that had nearly broken him. She didn't use the standard interface. Instead, she opened a small, unmarked maintenance panel below the cockpit entry hatch, a panel the manufacturer's own techs had ignored. From her worn kit, she produced a single interface cable and plugged it directly into the port. Her fingers moved over the terminal sheet attached, not with the methodical pace of a diagnostician, but with the fluid, impossible speed of a virtuoso. It wasn't repair, it was a conversation. She wasn't fixing bugs. She was rewriting the machine's foundational language, recalibrating its very soul from the machine code up. After 10 minutes, she unplugged the cable, closed the panel, and walked away, leaving no trace she had ever been there. The next morning, a reluctant Jensen was ordered back into the same simulator. He strapped in, bracing for another fight. But when he initiated the startup sequence, something was different. The hum of the machine was smoother, deeper. The controls felt alive in his hands, an extension of his own intent. He ran the same failed scenario. This time, when the dive began, the feedback was perfect. He could feel the air over the virtual control surfaces, sense the precise moment before a stall. The machine wasn't fighting him anymore. It was dancing with him. He didn't just recover. He executed a flawless inverted climb that left the simulation's aggressors burning in his wake. He emerged from the simulator, not sweating or cursing, but awestruck. He looked across the control room and saw Ilera quietly wiping down a redundant monitor. He walked over to the duty officer. "What happened to this thing overnight?" The officer just shook his head. "Nothing. Just her. She was in here for a few minutes. Cleaning." Madsen, now deeply intrigued and profoundly suspicious, called Jensen into his office. "She did something. I want to know what." He devised a new test. He ordered Jensen to run the Hades protocol, a classified stress test designed to break both pilot and machine, a scenario so impossibly chaotic it was deemed unwinnable. As Jensen's simulator powered up, the door to the control booth slid open and Ilera stepped inside. Madsen started to object, but the words died on his lips. She wasn't asking for permission. She put on a headset. The simulation began. It was a maelstrom. Multiple bogeys, system failures, environmental hazards. Jensen was a master, but he was drowning. Just as a fatal missile lock chimed, a voice cut through his private comms, calm and clear. "Okay, invert your thruster manifold and vent plasma." Now, it was an undocumented, unheard-of maneuver. Trusting an instinct he didn't understand, he did it. The missile lost its lock, confused by the sudden energy signature. "Dive," the voice commanded. "Use the canyon's magnetic interference as cover." She guided him, her instructions brief, precise, anticipating the enemy's every move. He didn't just survive. He won. Stunned into silence, Madsen stared at Ilera. How would she know those protocols? That maneuver wasn't in any manual. It was a ghost tactic, something a pilot might dream up in a moment of desperate genius. He stormed back to his office and made a call, demanding his contact at the Pentagon pull every string possible to unseal her file. As he waited, a 4-star general on an unrelated base tour walked through the hangar. The general, a man who had seen everything, was telling a story to his aide when he stopped dead. His eyes were fixed on the quiet woman coiling a cable near the Cerberus pod. He walked towards her, his entourage confused. He looked at her worn fatigues, his gaze locking onto the faded patch on her sleeve. The black raven, the silver tear. The general, a man before whom colonels trembled, slowly, deliberately, brought his hand up in a sharp salute. "Wraith," he said, his voice thick with a reverence that silenced the entire hangar. It's been a long time. The name hung in the air. At that exact moment, Madsen's aide ran in, holding a tablet with a newly unsealed file. The cover page was stark. Project Nightingale. Lead test pilot and system architect, Ilera Wraith Vance. She hadn't just tested the prototype. She had written the core code. She had designed the very soul of the machine they couldn't control. The story of the quiet consultant who was actually the legendary architect of the Cerberus system spread through the base like a shockwave. The next morning, when Ilera walked into the hangar for her duties, the chatter stopped. One by one, the young pilots, Jensen included, turned to face her. As she passed, they snapped to attention, a silent, unified column of respect. Colonel Madsen met her by the simulators. All his arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, humbled admiration. He didn't speak. He simply rendered a slow, formal salute. Alara stopped, looked him in the eye for a brief moment, and gave that same small, quiet nod she had on her first day. Then she continued on, her stride unchanged, her purpose fulfilled. Later, alone, she sat in the dark, silent cockpit of the Cerberus simulator. She placed her palm flat against the central console, cool and dormant. As her skin made contact, a low hum vibrated through the frame, a soft thrum of power that felt less like a machine and more like a living thing acknowledging its creator. A single diagnostic light flickered on, casting a faint glow on her sleeve. In the dim light, the silver tear on the raven patch seemed to hold a liquid depth, a quiet testament to a legacy secured not with words, but with silent,